Welcome back to Night School 6. We're back with Song of Myself, episode, I think, 3 on Song of Myself. We are all the way to part 8, and back with me is my esteemed colleague, Mr. Wes Schantz. Welcome back, Wes.
Hey, I think it's your turn to read first this time.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it, and this will be one of the as promised short episodes, and so since there's no crazy feedback going on my microphone, I'm feeling pretty blessed right now, and here we go. The little one sleeps in its cradle. I lift the gauze and look a long time and silently brush away flies with my hand. The youngster and the red-faced girl turn aside up the bushy hill. I peeringly view them from the top. The suicide sprawls on the bloody floor of the bedroom. I witness the corpse with its dabbled hair. I note where the pistol has fallen. The blab of the pave, tires of carts, slough of boot soles, talk of the promenaders, the heavy omnibus, the driver with the interrogating thumb, the clank of the shod horses on the granite floor. Excuse me, I went a little far there. The snow sleighs clinking, shouted jokes, pelts of snowballs, the hurrahs for popular favorites, the fury of roused mobs, the flap of the curtained litter, a sick man inside borne to the hospital, the meeting of enemies, the sudden oath, the blows and fall, the excited crowd, the policeman with his star quickly working his passage to the center of the crowd, the impassive stones that receive and return so many echoes. What groans of overfed or half-starved, who fall sunstruck or in fits. What exclamations of women taken suddenly, who hurry home and give birth to babes. What living and buried speech is always vibrating here. What howls restrained by decorum. Arrests of criminals, slights, adulterous offers made, acceptances, rejections with convex lips. I mind them, or the show of or resonance of them. I come and I depart. All right. I guess I'll share this.
Oh yeah. I'm looking at it on my screen. It's cool how quickly we move from the kind of ethereal, philosophical discussion from last time about death and life and being, and we just kind of plunge into all of these everyday sorts of occurrences, right? They're kind of passionate and they're kind of dramatic in some cases, right? Like the suicide or something like that. But others are just kind of just totally quotidian, right? The omnibus, the driver, the interrogating thumb. I love that. I guess asking, are you getting on? Are you getting off? Sort of thing. You have a snowball fight. You have, and then as you kind of come to the end of it, it grows, I guess, a little more abstract once again, right? Thinking about all of the stories that all of these people would have to tell, and doing it in terms of the sounds that they make, groans, exclamations, living and buried speech vibrating, and howls restrained by decorum. So it seems like there's a kind of ghost almost of all of these stories that vibrates in the form of these waves of sound and silence that permeate the actual material of these places. I find that really a little bit spooky. You know, we're still kind of in that ghost death realm, I guess, at the end of this part.
Right, and this seems to be the same sort of God or being character we were talking about from last time that was sort of hovering above. I am not, an earth nor an adjunct of earth from 7. Mm-hmm. And the creature that says undrape. And so here we have sort of a hodgepodge of events, experiences, and moments that humans have, like a suicide and a youngster. Again, the grass and the grass, right? Someone just out from the grass and somebody just back into it. Mm-hmm. We have, like you said, these everyday events like the blab of the pave, tires of carts, tires of carts, like hearing somebody's like grocery cart or like a cart in this case, which would be just like a car from the time he was in. It's like those are pretty mundane sounds. And yet there seems to be a claim here that these mundane sounds are precisely the nature, the world of nature that humans inhabit every day. And thus they are the stuff from which our experience is born. And so I come and I depart. It's as if what he is saying here is what we were interpreting last time, that he's sort of like an experience that is eternally in the now, but comes and goes very much quickly and, is gone forever after it's happened, like one's first kiss or seeing a river for the first time or, seeing the Empire State Building for the first time or hitting a home run, something like that. Those moments are maintained in memory, but not maintained in reality. And so I feel like I'm seeing here, again, sort of contrast between the ethereal jumping from one thing to another. And 8 also seems to be a microcosm of the entire poem in this way, right? That it is spanning the gamut. It's sort of a tour de force of things that happen in a mundane and yet also shocking way. And so it's all of life in a way. A lot of mundane stuff and some shocking stuff too. And things are well defined here, right? I think 9 times in a row, maybe 10 actually, followed by some whats. And so things are very definite, and then finished with some interrogations, but then not all the way. Then we get that dash at the end. The dash makes its way back in, that connecting force. And so that dash seems to be suggesting something like all of these lines are connected in some vibrating way, like notes in a song or something like that, a song of myself. And so even though the notes themselves look very different, it is the structure of them that gives the form to this. And it's interesting because we have to have sort of faith for that, right? Because we haven't yet observed a structure or what is it, a kelson running through this, as he says, the keelson. Mm-hmm. But I detect also that sort of phenomenological or existential element again, that this is about experiences, not just thoughts, not abstractions, but things that happen and that we see and that we feel, speech and vibration. And it's interesting because you feel a vibration as much as you hear it, like an earthquake. And there's living in buried speech is always vibrating here, what howls restrained by decorum. And that's interesting too, because there's an interplay of culture and nature there, right? Speech restrains in order to empower so that you can be informed and acquire and give, or rather convey information. But you do have to speak within limits, which does limit your being to some extent in order to harness it. It's as if, and a question I was asking you is whether Allen Ginsberg got his idea for Hal from this line, but I wonder if he's there also making just a comment on the fact that you do have to restrain your being to some extent to exist within human society, which is the place where human nature gets its full manifestation, or its fullest, even though it is not ultimately full because you can't be Howlin' everywhere.
Yeah, it's sort of like he can detect that underneath of the everyday, right? This kind of seething energy, which comes out in criminals and in mothers giving birth. And I love the crowd with the policeman with his star kind of passing through. I feel like that's a kind of interesting counterpoint to what the poet does, which is come and depart. So they're sort of parallel characters in this little brief short story we get. What the policeman does is find the way to the problem, right, and hit it with a club or something. What the poet does is observe and hear and detect all of this underlying motive and energy, and then let go, move on to the next thing.
Yeah, and in some way they both maintain culture, right? Whereas the one focuses on upholding the rules of culture, one is engaged in the act of renewing culture. And just one second. All right, sorry about that, Wes. And we're back. And so should we move on to, okay, so we were saying something about the how both the cop or the officer with his shiny badge upholds sort of the face of society or the rules of society, or that which we consciously understand keeps us together, whereas the poet, as sort of renewer of society, the Dionysian rather than the Apollonian element, seems to manifest the unwritten rules of a society in order to refresh and renew it so that it does not die of over order, like in a fascist police state. It's almost like a suggestion of everybody's got their role.
Yeah. And it's important to distinguish where the role is functioning, right? Like it's purposeful and living and vibrant, and where it becomes, something that's exceeding its bounds. Its balance maybe is a better word for it. So
right, and we also have that interplay, just as we were talking about last time, the interplay between words with different etymological origins. Howl, which is very much an Old English word, that one syllable, sort of ugly sounding and representative in a way of its own sound. It's sort of like a piece of onomatopoeia. It's close. And then the word decorum in there, that Latinic word, itself a piece of decorum. If your language is so sophisticated that you use Latinisms, not only does your behavior have decorum, which means an observation of known rules, and being genteel, which is the opposite of howling, like a baby, and is a mark of great sophistication. It's like even the word itself is a mark of great sophistication and appropriate use of it. And so there's also a range of being that I think is being held up in front of our eyes, sort of like the how pure being of a 2-year-old, as opposed to the sort of highly sophisticated, genteel society person of like 55, who's like translating Thucydides for fun, which would have been an activity that, somebody in antebellum America from the East Coast might have done.
I suppose so. Yeah, that's I've never read Thucydides, but it sounds like a pretty decorous thing to do. Sure.
Well, maybe we'll get there. Maybe I can get Oscar to do that with me too.
That's right.
All right, yeah. We might be able to get through this next part.
9 is short. All right. 9. The big doors of the country barn stand open and ready. The dried grass of the harvest time loads the slow-drawn wagon. The clear light plays on the brown, gray, and green intertinged. The armfuls are packed to the sagging mow. I am there. I help. I came stretched atop of the load. I felt its soft jolts, one leg reclined on the other. I jump from the cross beams and seize the clover and timothy, and roll head over heels and tangle my hair full of wisps.
Okay, so we have another. So if you ever have the opportunity to read Carl Jung's 5-year seminar on Nietzsche's Zarathustra, that's a real opportunity to take. And I'm not just saying that to you, Wes, I'm saying that to any reader. And that would be something I'd be very interested in talking about at some point. But basically, Jung makes this claim that Zarathustra, which is an odd work of poetry, very different from Nietzsche's other work, makes not logical jumps between chapters, but intuitive jumps that are non-rational. And so I would make the claim that there's a major jump made between 8 and 9 that is one of these intuitive jumps. That's maybe non-rational at first, but makes a lot of sense creatively or in terms of associating ideas, which is often what we do in our literary amplificatory lectures, because we go from the city to the country, right? And so that's a sort of non-linear but highly balanced symbolic change, right? Because the image of the city evokes the image of the country, the city mouse and the country mouse. And Dickens's comments or book about a tale of two cities, right? Mm-hmm. And the contrast between the country and the city being one of those major contrasts in way that humans live their lives. And so now we have an expression of the sort of everyday of a farm rather than the city. Instead of wagons or carts going around, we have a slow-drawn wagon. We have the country barn and the big doors and sagging mow rather than pavement and gray and green and clear light and probably some good smelling air too. And I am there. So we have this, again, this being or God narrator, or the subject that experiences, perhaps. I am there. I help. We have all these pronouns. I, 3 in this line, very Trinitarian. I, and because there's an identity to them too, right? Came, stretched atop of the load. I felt its soft jolts, one leg reclined on the other. I jumped from the cross beams and seized the clover and Timothy, and roll head over heels and tingle my hair full of wisps. So sort of childish but joyous. And there's a freedom to this sort of activity, which is in contrast to the idea of harvest time loads and slow drawn wagons. And so, yeah, that's what I see so far there.
Yeah, it's a big contrast in terms of setting, but also it's a much briefer section 9 compared to 8. That is, we don't get any direct talk about death or birth, right? It's sort of but we do have the harvest time, and the harvest time is a great image for both those things, for the purpose that this thing lived and died for, which is to go towards some higher end, right? It's being gathered, it's being taken and conveyed. And as you say, it's a really playful image that we get. It's a laborer, this eye. He could be any common laborer, but he's not just that. He's also this whimsical tumbling through the clover. And I love the wisps of it that get in his hair. That's kind of like, his poetic ideas or something, right? That just kind of cling to him as he goes tumbling and reclining on the hay wagon and so forth.
And it's interesting because drawing our attention to the harvest time and the biblical metaphors, the idea of the great harvest or revelation, when the elect or the wheat are separated from the chaff, is interesting because that metaphor seems almost like what happens in a human life. We all plant the seeds of our experience while we grow up, but few happen to actually produce a distillation of that experience in articulate or representative form, right? Like artistic or some incredible performance or some incredible piece of literature or philosophy. And so there does seem to be a suggestion here of the idea of production, of being productive, of making something of yourself. And the thing you make of yourself is the thing that can make things. The whole point of the beginning of your life is to acquire enough skill and experience to then produce something greater than you have been provided in your education. And, I wonder to what extent that is the idea of the great harvest, that, many are called, few are chosen, and that everybody gets to experience in life, but whosoever distills that experience into articulate form in order to convey that information across time and space to another, that's a blessed person and a blessing to others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's just like harvesting the food from the ground and then, selling it to people so they can eat. It's just the abstract sort of host on Sunday form of that.
Right.
Well, so do you want to do that? Oh, sorry, go on. Sorry.
No, I just agreeing. I think it's a really cool leap that he makes there. I'm okay going on into 10. It's pretty long. We can just say a little bit about it maybe and call it a night.
Do you wanna do that one? Because 9 was so short.
I'm fine reading it. I'd love to. All right, so 10. Alone far in the wilds and mountains I hunt, wandering amazed at my own lightness and glee. In the late afternoon, choosing a safe spot to pass the night, kindling a fire and broiling the fresh-killed game, falling asleep on the gathered leaves with my dog and gun by my side. The Yankee Clipper is under her skysail. She cuts the sparkle and scud. My eyes settle the land. I bend at her prow or shout joyously from the deck. The boatmen and clam diggers arose early and stopped for me. I tucked my trouser ends in my boots and went and had a good time. You should have been with us that day round the chowder kettle. I saw the marriage of the trapper in the open air in the far west. The bride was a red girl. Her father and his friend sat near, cross-legged and dumbly smoking. They had moccasins to their feet and large, thick blankets hanging from their shoulders. On a bank lounged the trapper. He was dressed mostly in skins. His luxuriant beard and curls protected his neck. He held his bride by the hand. She had long eyelashes. Her head was bare. Her coarse, straight locks descended upon her voluptuous limbs and reached to her feet. The runaway slave came to my house and stopped outside. I heard his motions, crackling the twigs of the woodpile. Through the swung half door of the kitchen I saw him, limpsy and weak. I went where he sat on a log and led him in and assured him and brought water and filled a tub for his sweated body and bruised feet, and gave him a room that entered from my own, and gave him some coarse, clean clothes, and remember perfectly well his revolving eyes and his awkwardness, and remember putting plasters on the galls of his neck and ankles. He stayed with me a week before he was recuperated and passed north. I had him sit next to me at table. My firelock leaned in the corner.
All right, so I just have a couple things to say. We have several different stories here. We're in the mountains hunting, and then we're on a sort of ship on the East Coast. And then boatmen and clam diggers are meeting me, and each of these are stories, and then a marriage of a trapper to a red-haired girl, and then a runaway slave, and we have those series of ands at the beginning of the sentence as well. And so just a couple things is we have all those stories, and they're all very interesting practical experiences like you might share at a bar. And so I see two things there, that what this part seems to be modeling is how a conversation goes. Again, another stream of consciousness or association of ideas or amplification, where you go from one story that's completing itself to another story, to another story, to another story, and each is equally a part of being. But also just specifically the very beginning and the very last two stanzas, the runaway slave and the marriage of the trapper and the red man, remind me so much of who would come after him, Faulkner, while also the middle, talking about sort of New England and boats, of course, reminds me of the author of Moby Dick, Herman Melville. But there's this first stanza is just so powerful to me. It sounds like somewhere I would want to be. It draws me in, alone far in the wilds and mountains I hunt, wandering amazed at my own lightness and glee. Like that language is fun, playful. In the late afternoon, choosing a safe spot to pass the night, kindling a fire and broiling the fresh killed game, falling asleep on gathered leaves with my dog and my gun by my side. There's just such a sense of purpose and place and security and everything going right in that stanza. It's just a really great time. And almost like how you would describe something in conversation, when you're distilling the details down to the most important ones, like when you make an episode of a show, right? You don't show everything that all the characters doing or at all the times. You show the meaningful moments, and so this is distilled down to those. Well, that's about what I have to say. What are you thinking?
Totally, yeah. It seems like we're getting a conglomeration of kind of crystallized lives just lined up next to each other. And they're incredibly beautiful. They remind me a little bit of that room stocked with perfumes back in like section 2 or 3 or whatever it was, right? But they're so elegantly crafted little gems, but they're not delicate in that way. They're rough, they're also, as you say, sort of the language of everyday conversation, of telling stories, of passing the time and trying to top the previous story, maybe a little element of that too, that kind of Canterbury Tales attitude towards making a game out of the storytelling, right? Who can tell the best one, who can tell their story the best. And what makes a good story, right, seems to be connections between people. That's anyway what the last two are definitely about. And in any case, even the first one where he's totally alone, it's his telling of the story to you and that emotion that it conveys that makes it so fresh and living, right? And I find it cool that the Americanness of it is hinted at in various ways, right? The Yankee clipper, you've got a kind of imaginary trapper character there who's kind of an idealization, and I think each of these is in a way it's idealizing a situation, and yet it's concrete. It rings true,
and also showing the true diversity of America and celebrating it, right? Myself being perhaps the spirit of America or the being of it, because it's the red man, it's the runaway slave, which means black person. It's the sailor from the east, most likely, Caucasian person, and also hunter in the mountains, who knows what sort of person. And so many different sorts of people, so many different races, so many different ways of life, so many different terrains in which they live, so many different situations in which they find themselves. And, even the idea of the marriage of the trapper to the red girl, the idea of the institution of marriage, bringing together two peoples to one person or to one people. And so that seems to be part of America too, right? And the runaway slave also connotes, a sense of a desire for freedom, because this person takes in the slave, that like even that there seems to be a sense of a people coming together that is extremely diverse because of shared values.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Shared humanity, right? So it's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and a shared desire for freedom, because when you think of a boat, you think of freedom out on the sea. When you think of a hunter in the woods, you think of freedom. When you think of a marriage, you definitely do not think of freedom. But perhaps there is an element of it there. And a runaway slave, somebody pursuing freedom and being helped along the way as well. At least, so I guess if you wanted to find freedom in this marriage of the trapper, it's between, it is what is the technical term for it? Is miscegenation, right? It is in this country, people of different races can marry, and that's okay. And it's like, I suppose the idea is we were pretty quick to that idea, and we're pretty quick to new ideas as a people. Silicon Valley's any representation.
I think that's probably another element, because I think that word was even used as mostly in a negative connotation at Whitman's time, especially. And so maybe that's another aspect of what was controversial about his poem, though, is that he was openly celebrating these things, which perhaps made a lot of his countrymen uncomfortable at the time. And I'm sure that readers now will come across these passages which are, raw. They reopen historical questions which have never been fully settled, right? So there's a lot of that kind of shaking up of the society that you described as the poet's job here, even in celebrating this kind of idealized version of it.
Right, and I think what he's showing is that what he's supposed to direct our attention toward is the ideal that brings us all together, and that insofar as our actions are not in accord with that ideal, he's going to show them to our face and show us that where we are going wrong. Because he seems to see even clearer than, like, say, we do, that America is about freedom. And the people need to be pursuing that in whatever way they want, and they get to do that in whatever way they want, so long as they're not unlawful, and then the policeman comes. Because that's the greatest value of this place. And he seems to, like we've been saying about poets and, say, the Harry Potter podcast, that they seem to see the future to some extent. That, like Peterson claims that Nietzsche and Dostoevsky seem to see like 50 years into the future. It's as if what Whitman is helping to do is guide the perceptions of his own people towards what they should become. And, if he's directing people's attention towards, like something that would have been a major issue at that time in interracial marriage, it's like, well, it's not nearly as big an issue nowadays. And it's to what extent did he see that as a reality that would come based on our values? And to what extent did he have a hand in helping to produce that? Would be a big question that I would have. At least the first question. The second question I'd be, not as interested in, and it's much harder to answer.
Well, it's, I guess, just reading him and, making his poem relevant is a big step towards making that ideal reality come about more fully. So I'm going to call it there. I'm going to call it a night. I appreciate the time as always.
Yeah, thank you for the time, Wes, and thanks for helping me get my audio back on. And, well, night school, we got to come up with a name for the night school people, the Night of Tears or something. That's, I know, terrible, but
the Night Scholars.
The Night Scholars. Oh, perfect. You've been killing it with the names, Wes. Dang. The Night Scholars. Well, fellow Night Scholars, get some rest. You need a good rest to get this education, and hopefully this is useful to some of you. And if it's not useful to you now, I hope it's useful to you in the future.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Wes.
Thanks for listening. Thank you.